people of Chelsea, we have a very special event today. We are at the Walnut Street Synagogue for Jewish Heritage Day. This is the man in charge of the synagogue. He is the president, doing a great job keeping this outstanding institution going. Ed Medros, take it away, president of the Walnut Street Synagogue. Here you go.
Thank you, Kerry, for that introduction. And hello, everybody. We welcome you to the historic Walnut Street Synagogue on the National Register of Historic Places in 1993. Today is a special event for us, and I want to thank the Cultural Council for a grant from them which allowed us to do this day. As you can see, we'll have about 150 people who are walking around. A lot of them are touring the synagogue for the first time. Then at around 3:15, we will have a speaker, David Kaufman, Jewish historian, scholar, written 2 books, and also wrote, forget what chapter it is, in The Jews of Boston by Ellen Smith and Jonathan Sarna. And what you're seeing in the background are a lot of Jewish historical artifacts from this synagogue and other synagogues that have closed, and which shows the vibrant Jewish life that was and is still going on in Chelsea. And so there are a lot going on, and then we're going to go upstairs and we will have a speech discussion by David Kaufman. So thank you for joining with us, and go to the walnutstreetsynagogue.com, see what events we have coming up. We do a lot of online programming that I think you'll all enjoy. And thank you.
Back with Chelsea Community Cable Television, led by Executive Director Paula Bradley Bachelor. Mr. Medros, and we'll let you take it away with Rachel King.
Executive Rachel King, Executive Director, Walnut Family Jewish Heritage Center. That's a tongue tie. I want to introduce Rachel. If you remember, a while back, Rachel did Jewish Neighborhood Voices at Williams School, in which they have taken audio recordings of people who grew up in Chelsea, know the Chelsea life, the Chelsea system, and what have you. And so Rachel is here with a booth on Jewish Heritage Day at the Walnut Street Synagogue, a big supporter of us, and we support her for what she's doing as an archivist for Jewish heritage.
We are an archive, an educational center in Boston, and we preserve the Jewish history of Greater Boston and New England. We have so many collections having to do with the Jewish community and history of Chelsea, including the ledgers of Walnut Street Synagogue, going back to the beginning of the synagogue. We're very proud and honored to preserve their history, as well as the history of families, businesses, institutions in Chelsea, going back to the earliest arrivals of Jewish immigrants who settled in Chelsea densely. It was one of the most Jewishly populated parts of Greater Boston, and they built a beautiful community here with just strong connections and heritage that lasts to this day. So we're really proud and honored to preserve the Jewish history of Chelsea.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rachel. We appreciate it.
Happy to partner with our friends at Walnut Street Synagogue.
Lina Family Center Jewish Heritage.
JewishHeritageCenter.org.
Okay. Yes. No? Can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you for coming today, September 22nd, Chelsea Jewish Heritage Day, part of the 400th anniversary of Chelsea. A whole bunch of events going on, and we jumped in to do one on Jewish history There's a lot of it here, and we thank you for the great turnout. I want to thank the Chelsea Cultural Council for giving us a grant that allowed this event to take place. So we thank them. We thank the city of Chelsea, who has been very good to us over the years, and we appreciate them with community preservation grants to help restore the outside of the building. As you can see, the water damage that has taken place over 115 years. We're very pleased to have Rachel. Rachel, please come up. Rachel is from the Walnut Jewish Family Heritage Center. I always mix it up, and she's just going to say a few words and kind of move on. Maybe that's what you have to do with beat.
Can you hear me? Is it actually amplified?
Well, we're just going to...
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And I am honored to join all of you in this wonderful celebration
out to Simona DiNappi from the Museum of Fine Arts. And the Orange Street art done by Sam Katz has been refurbished, is on display in the Judaica unit, and it is beautiful. You'll also see a film, and Jerry Bornstein is right there, who was an Orange Street member. He tells the whole history of where he was placing bets and chewing gum and skipping a high roller. I'd also like to call out Carol Klingen. Carol was very helpful in Founders Day and putting that together along with some other people that are here. So it's my honor to introduce David E. Kaufman. And so I'm going to read the bio, and if I forget anything, David, you'll correct me.
You can skip that.
No. Mr. Kaufman, Dr. Kaufman, is an established American Jewish historian who earned his PhD at Brandeis University in, I'm not going to say the year. During his graduate study, he focused on the history of the Jewish communities of the Boston area and became well known as a popular lecturer and tour guide of Jewish neighborhoods. In the authoritative volume, The Jews of Boston by CJP, 1995, he published his first major article on the synagogues of Boston. He is also the son of Chelsea, as his great-grandfather was Asher Bookstein, the unofficial sofa stamp Torah scribe of the Chelsea Jewish community. So there is a connection. Asher, Irving, we have some of his illustrations downstairs on the wall of Jewish Family Society, Jewish war veterans of Chelsea, and Jewish family books. And so he was a prolific illustrator of the Jewish community. Thank you for that. Dr. Kaufman has taught at Brown University, University of Massachusetts in Amherst, Hebrew Union College, Los Angeles, and Hofstra University. He has written numerous articles on the social, religious, and architectural history of the American Synagogue. Some of you know he also has written 2 books, another one in the process, we're not going to mention that. Shul with a Pool, the Synagogue Center in American Jewish History, and Jew Who in the 60s, American Celebrity and Jewish Identity. Some of you know Dr. Kaufman as a frequent speaker at our partner Orange County Scholar Program, and he's also taught at Melton School of Adult Jewish Learning, Park Avenue Synagogue in New York, and elsewhere. And Dr. Kaufman is excited to be returning to the Walnut Street Shul for this talk, in which he will give context to family history by recounting the greater and often unappreciated history of the Jews of Chelsea, Mass. And so without further ado,
Thank you so much for coming out today. It's a pleasure to see all of you. I want to thank Ed and also Tom for bringing me up to speak today. They've been seeing some of my lectures of late online, and most of what I've been talking about recently is anti-Semitism, more anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. So it's really kind of a relief to come and speak on another subject, something a little bit more congenial for all of us. I also have to acknowledge how special a feeling it is to stand in this behalf. Thinking of through the years, how many rabbis, Jewish teachers, leaders, scholars have spoken from this very spot. One of them was me. It was a little over 30 years ago that as a graduate student at Brandeis, I stood at this very spot leading a tour of a synagogue group from Lexington in the past. And it included my beloved professor of Brandeis, a rabbi named Leon Jitt, who was a member of that immigration and came on the tour. And Leon was someone who lived in the Boston area for many years. He was a professor in the Jewish Studies department in Brandeis for quite a long time. Yet walking into this space, which he had never seen nor did he know existed, it took his breath away, as it does so many visitors who come to see this magnificent space. Now I'm going to be talking about the architecture today. Luckily we have someone who's really expert in that, named Sam Gruber, who has spoken here, and I hope will come back again. Nor am I going to be talking at great length on the history of the Chelsea Jewish community. We'll get to it. But as a Jewish historian, I'd like to talk about the bigger picture a little bit, to share with you some Jewish historical context, as we call it. I'm curious, how many people, let's see a show of hands, how many people have roots in Chelsea? How many people either from here or family roots? That's quite a number. Now let's see, raise hands, how many people live here today? Just a few. So it is, great, okay. Afterwards, I'd love the people who are still here, if you could chat with me later. I'd love to know what that experience is like. But my focus is on those people who have left and yet still retain a very strong, powerful connection to their hometown. Now, part of it is easy. I mean, we all have very fond memories and very strong feelings about where we grew up, the old neighborhood, hometown, etc. It's where we became the person we are. It's what formed us. It's our childhood, our youth. It's when our entire family was attacked. It was an environment that we really haven't experienced since. So the nostalgia, the strong pull we all feel toward the old neighborhood, this makes eminent sense. What I'd like to do is share with you some more historical thinking about this. And talk for a little bit, and I hope you'll indulge me. I'd like to talk about the relationship that Jews have and have had throughout our history with cities, with urban environments, because the connection to Chelsea is related to that intimacy. Since I'm standing on the beam, I'm not a rabbi. People used to sometimes ask me, how come I'm not a rabbi? And I would say, well, I trained here for a living. I used to teach at the Hebrew College, training rabbinic students in the Reform movement. But I'm a historian. And I'm going to take you through kind of a broad historical survey, but we're going to start, since I'm on a bima, since I'm feeling a little bit rabbinic in this moment, we're going to start with the Torah. Let's start with the Hebrew Bible. I'm going to go back to the beginning. And something that isn't often appreciated about our Torah, our sacred foundational document, is that by and large, it's a relatively anti-urban narrative. It's generally speaking, with one major exception, which you might be able to guess, it's generally hostile to cities. Think about the very first city mentioned is where a group of people build a tower. And at first they're all speaking the same language, but God says, you know what, I'm going to mix up their languages and they won't know what's happening. That was the famous Tower of Babel. Babel refers to Babylon, one of the great cities of the ancient Near East and Mesopotamia. The city was a place of confusion. The city was a place of a kind of a balagan, a mishmash of different languages and cultures. Think about the prophet Jonah, who was sent to Nineveh, the city of Nineveh, in order to prophesy, in order to bring God's word to them, who didn't want to go, refused to go, because it's such an evil place, such a forbidding prospect going off to the big bad city. Sodom and Gomorrah, so terrible were they that they turned Lot's wife into stone. The Torah generally doesn't like cities. And for me, the most telling moment in the biblical narrative is the very beginning of the Abraham Sabbath. One of the very first words that God says to Abraham, the very first commandment God gives to the very first Jew, is he says, Lech lecha, go forth. get out of here. And where was here? Where was Abraham? Well, according to the Torah, he was born in Ur of the Chaldees, another major city of the ancient world, and then moved to Haran, another big city, and it was there that God told him. And just parenthetically, that two-city background is one of many, but is a famous proof or evidence of the documentary hypothesis, that the Torah was several documents that were later edited together. And apparently, in one source it said Abraham was from Ur, the other one said he was from Haran, and so the redacted, the editor, just simply said, well, he started off in one and then he moved to the other. So that's one of the ways that the book of scholars demonstrate that the origins and the development of the God tells him to leave the city and go off to the land of Canaan, which was undeveloped, which was essentially wilderness. Get out of the city and go to the promised land. It's in the land where we will be able to form as a new nation and become God's people. So the city is, again, we tend to focus on the promise of the land and everything that ensues there, but it's easy to forget that God had to get out of the city to do so. And so in our tradition, in our Jewish memory, given to us by the religious tradition, there's kind of a bias against cities. And why did I just spend 5 minutes bending your ears about this? Because of the extraordinary irony that throughout the rest of our history, we have loved cities. We have done nothing but gravitate to and move to and settle in cities. There, of course, are Jews in our history who find themselves in a small town or in the countryside, the mountain Jews in North Africa, for example. But again and again throughout Jewish history, we have found our ways to a city, so much so that has become part of the image of Jews, that we are urbanites, that we are city dwellers and city lovers. There are cities that have become seen as Jewish cities. So strong is this association between Jews and urban environments. Now, we could go, I left out the one major exception in the Bible, and that, of course, is Jerusalem. The Bible is going to be written in a city. So, once again, ironic that the narrative, the story that is told, contains this anti-city feeling. But nevertheless, as we move through the Bible, especially into the later prophets and writings, the importance and the holiness of God's city, where God's holy temple is, founded by King David. David's city becomes prominent and develops a sense of centrality, of sanctity, of all importance that implicitly is measured against all those other evil cities. This is the good one. This is the one that demands your loyalty. And then when the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and its holy temple in 586 BCE, they are cast off. They're exiled to Babylon. It was in Babylon that a Jewish psalmist wrote a very famous psalm, "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem." Now, there was the yearning, that deep emotional connection to the city was there already, but is magnified 100 times once it is lost. We had a great time growing up in Chelsea, but once you move away from it, once you lose it, that emotion becomes that much greater. Let's briefly, we'll come back to this. I'm sorry, I left out something key, which is the nickname of Chelsea, of the Chelsea Jewish community. When I started into the history, that was the key to it. What is Chelsea's nickname? It is often in the literature and in communal collective memory, it is often called Little Jerusalem, or the Jerusalem of Massachusetts, or even the Jerusalem of America. That's how many people have heard that before? Just a few. Okay. Well, you should know that historically, the regard in which Chelsea was held by various Jewish leaders and the like was so high that it was compared to Jerusalem. Now, calling Jerusalem of America is a little bit of an exaggeration because New York is so dominant in the American parallel to, responds quite nicely to the heyday of Chelsea. Its story and Chelsea's story are quite similar. One difference being is that Chelsea is an entire city. It has its own urban identity. And the city as a whole comes to be seen as a little Jerusalem, which is another way of saying it's seen as a Jewish city. Now that's a phenomenon, that notion of Jews moving to cities and recreating Jerusalem as they move throughout the world. That's a phenomenon that is mainly relevant to the modern world. Let me just quickly remind you that, again, throughout their history, Jews found their ways to the city and made their mark there one way or another. The Hellenistic capital of Alexandria in Egypt was a kind of a Jewish center, a very important Jewish community historically. The same we could say of Constantinople, later Istanbul, in the Muslim world. So at one point there were 1 million Jews living in that Muslim capital. It was a place where Jews came together, flocked together. We can talk about Venice, we can talk about Amsterdam, we can talk about Cordoba in Spain. Any number of cities throughout our history have attracted such a concentration of Jews that Jewish life there takes off. It's not until the modern period, however, the modern period characterized by urbanization across the board. Before the modern era, cities were not the norm. They grow much larger, and they grow much more important in terms of the world population, only in the modern world. And the modern world is also characterized by Jewish urbanization. If Jews were always attracted to cities, that will once again be accelerated. That will be all the more true in the modern world. And so we have come into the modern world a number of such little Jerusalems that are famous in our collective memory, in our history. One is the so-called Jerusalem of Lithuania. The city of Vilna comes to be known as the Jerusalem of Lithuania for its extraordinary array of yeshivot and great rabbis and Talmudic learning. Of course, the most famous of them being the Gaon of Vilna, the Elijah Gaon, one of the great rabbis of our history, the great Talmudists, Holocaust of our history. Later on, it's a small city, again, a Sephardic setting in the Ottoman Empire, in what's today Greece. The city of Salonika will become so heavily populated by Jews that it too will come to develop that kind of reputation as a Jewish city, as a New Jerusalem. The city I mentioned Venice, and just one last, just to tick off a number of cities. Budapest, never had a major Jewish community, but it was large enough, it was prominent enough, again, in the modern era, the 18th, 19th, even 20th centuries. Budapest came to be mockingly called Judapest. Right? Now, that wasn't always meant as a compliment, but it did reflect a reality that Jews were prominent, visible, comfortable in that city. So, once again, throughout our history, we have the urban people. Part of who we are, our self-image, and the way other people see us is related to that city life. And so I ask, how is that? Why is that? What is it about cities that attracts Jews again and again? And I'd suggest that there are 3 factors that are paramount. One is Jews are, as a diaspora people, as a wandering people, they gravitate more often than not to commercial pursuits, to business, to buying and selling, to becoming tradesmen and merchants. Not all Jews are such merchants, but certainly a majority of them find their way to some related occupation. And so a city is a place where there will be economic opportunity. And this is true of non-businessmen as well. There are craftsmen or some other occupation, but the relationship of Jews to business will bring them to cities, and through their experience and their enthusiasm for that way to make a living, they will help to build those cities into major centers. We see this in Amsterdam, we see this in Venice, etc. That's one reason. Reason number 2 is that Jews throughout our history have been subject to some form of what we now call anti-Semitic one feels, at least, safe. Because one is not in a city so conspicuous. There are, almost by definition, urban environment is a multicultural environment. Jews aren't the only outsiders. In fact, in most large cities, everyone's an outsider. That conveys a sense of safety and security. There are other factors here as well. Historically, Jews were often, in order to protect themselves as a community, often formed an alliance, a good relationship with the ruler. So there was kind of what's called a vertical alliance between Jews and the royal house. Where do the royal houses live? But in cities. So again and again, Jews found their ways to cities. Safety, security is number 2. And then number 3 is the one that may have occurred to you already. And that is simply life is with Jewish people, other Jews. One can be a Jew on a desert island. And you all know the joke about the Jewish Robinson Crusoe. Do you not know this, right? Really? It's all a joke. So let's gloss over that. Break in the lecture for a moment. A Jewish fellow found himself stranded on a desert island. He was there for over 40 years. He's finally rescued. He takes his rescuers around the island, very proudly showing him, this is the home I built. This is beautiful. Street I built. This shopping mall I built. He had everything. At the end of the main street were 2 beautiful synagogues. And they said to him, Hyman, you've been here for 40 years by yourself. Why 2 synagogues? What on earth do you need 2 synagogues? He says, it's very, very simple. That's the one I go to daven at. Not the one I wouldn't be put there. Is that a New York joke? Is that why? That's interesting to me as well. So, Jews can live alone, but in order to create Jewish life, one needs other Jews. You need a minion. You need a community. You need other people to do fundraising from, right? I don't have all the money in the world. I've got to go to my friends to raise money to build a new school or one. Jews require other Jews. Those are the 3 factors. One is economic, one is safety and security, and one is Jewish culture, religion, Jewish life. Those 3 factors together have again and again brought Jews to cities, as I am saying. Now, before I get to our subject, Chelsea, let me also talk about a couple of urban forms that Jews have created along the way. In the medieval pattern, for example, was Jews would come to a city, but they would very quickly be assigned by the authorities or else choose themselves to live within a particular area of that city. Right? In German, it's the Judengasse, the Jewish street. In Italian, the Italian word is ghetto, which will first be introduced in the early 16th century, but there were earlier versions. But the word itself is introduced in Venice in 1560. The idea of an enclosed area of the city where the Jews may live. And we, in part because of the terrible memory of the way the word ghetto was used during the Holocaust, and for various other reasons as well, we tend to think that term, that word ghetto, tends to conjure up negative images of confinement, of discrimination, of being othered, being literally outside the greater community and greater society. It's exclusion area. That's the way we think of the word. Historically, there's a bit of a paradox here. The ghetto was instituted both, again, chosen by Jews to live together, and also instituted from above. It was often created as a way to make sure Jews could be part of the urban fabric. There were rulers who were afraid that the mobs might chase them away and try to kill them and expel them, and so they created a safe space for Jews. So the Judengasse in Muslim lands is called a Mellah. Again, the ghetto is in Central Europe. These were all related forms of Jewish life, or rather forms that enable Jewish residence in the city. There's a medieval Jewish historian named Ken Stowe who made the point, who writes, confinement in the ghetto could in fact be exploited to turn the ghetto experience into one that liberated the individual Jew and generated a sense of personal well-being. In other words, we today think of the ghetto in very negative terms, but quite often through history it was seen as a boon, as an opportunity to focus, to concentrate, and develop Jewish life within those walls. I would further add that our image is of a wall with a gate and a lock, and outsiders were kept out and Jews were kept in. The historical truth of the matter is that outsiders were continuously coming into the ghetto to do their shopping. It was the bargain shopping of the day. And Jews, conversely, would leave the ghetto almost at will, and the back and forth intercourse between the Jewish community and the greater society was much greater than we would imagine. So the ghetto and this form of Jews grouping together within a larger city were a way to continue to be urban. And so we come to modern era, finally. In the modern era, as I started to say before, urbanization proceeds apace. So many Jews will begin moving to cities that, for one thing, the Russian Tsar will panic. Jews are moving to Moscow and to St. Petersburg, and they will decide to enact around the year 1800 a decree keeping Jews out of Russian cities and forming a country-sized area called the Pale of Settlement into which Jews were confined. It was a way to keep Jews out of the cities of the Russian Empire. What did those Jews do? How many people have ancestors who came from the Pale of Settlement? Russia, Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, most of us. Those Jews, what did they do in that situation under that harsh measure, being forced to live in a country-sized ghetto, essentially? What did they do? They formed a new form of Jewish communal structure called a shtetl. The word shtetl with the diminutive L at the end. Shtot is a city. Shtetl is a little city, a little town. The Jews didn't become rural. They didn't go to work on the farms. There was a peasantry that did that. What they did was form hundreds of small towns, essentially recreating the life of a city for a small group until they could move, as they did, as you're all aware, move back again to a city and yet again recreate that. Now, in the 20th century, we have certain cities that are going to be heavily populated by Jews. One of them is Warsaw, is the largest Jewish community in Eastern Europe. There are over 300,000 Jews in the city of Warsaw in the 1920s, which constituted about 1/3 of the city of Warsaw. 1 out of every 3 people living in that city were Jewish. 1/3 is a very high percentage. Of course, New York is also on that list, where over 2 million Jews will settle, and then the Jewish population of New York will hit 2 million in the middle of that century, and will reach a height of about 27%, over 1 in every 4 New Yorkers. Once again, quite a high number. The point is that it's not necessarily the absolute number that's meaningful, but rather the percentage. How many, what is the proportion of Jews to the greater city, the greater urban setting? Once you're over 1/4, once you're over 1/3, the Jews are extraordinarily conspicuous to others. They are becoming very important in the life of the general city, and their numbers enable them to form these organic communities, these shtetls, these recreated shtetl-like neighborhoods. We come to Chelsea. Chelsea is, as I said earlier, near and dear to most of you because you have roots here. But as a historian, I'm here to tell you that Chelsea deserves much greater attention. It has yet to find its historian, but I'm very encouraged that there are people working on this. And I hope to see something from you in the back in the next few years, the back pictures. The reason reason Chelsea is so important is that, a few reasons, but we start with numbers and density of population. As you know, there were Jews in Chelsea at the end of the 19th century. There were several thousand prior to the Great Fire in 1908. But from 1908 onward, as Chelsea will be rebuilt, largely by Jewish residents returning, to some measure supported by the greater Boston Jewish community, but motivated by their desire to rebuild Chelsea in their image, and so they do. The population will, it's still the immigrant era, the era of mass immigration. The population will rise dramatically through the 19-teens, so that by 1920, there are, again, compared to the other numbers, there are about 20,000 Jews in Chelsea in the 1920s, which doesn't sound like a lot in itself until you do the proportion. That 20,000 Jews, which will go a bit higher in the 30s, but it's in the 20,000 range, that hits the 40% mark. Sometimes you might have heard, you might hear that Chelsea was half Jewish, nearly half Jewish. That's not entirely correct, it was a little bit lesser, but 40+% is remarkable. It means that it feels like an all-Jewish city. The other 30-40% are Chelsea residents as well. We don't want to ignore them, we don't want to diminish them, but they don't dominate culturally, socially, religiously, the way the Jewish, and economically, the way the Jewish community of Chelsea will. So in American Jewish history at large, there is no parallel case. There are neighborhoods where the numbers get quite high. The Bronx, for example, was close to 40% at one time. Parts of New York, Swirl Hill in Pittsburgh, areas of Cleveland and other major cities have some Jewish neighborhood that might rival it in terms of those proportions. But Chelsea will be a city unto itself, and to have an environment that is so impressed upon by its Jewish element will give rise to that naming of Chelsea as a new Jerusalem, as a little Jerusalem. Now, what does that constitute? What does it mean to call Chelsea a new Jerusalem? Well, again, I'll say there are three primary factors, three arenas in which Jews really will make their mark, three ways in which I think it is legitimate to call this an American Jerusalem. Yerushalayim d'Amerika is the Yiddish version of that. The first, I've already mentioned, is the population density, and I will just reiterate the degree to just how important that is. Can't overstate it. Growing up, as many of you did, in an environment that feels all Jewish is a very powerful thing. It's very powerful when you are a minority in the country at large and the world at large. The percentage of Jews in the world is minuscule. The percentage of Jews in the United States is 2%. Wherever we go, we are a small minority. And thus we create a sub-environment, a space that is a kind of a Jewish space where we don't feel that sense of being small, a minority, powerless, etc. It's very similar, those of you who spend any time in Israel, it's very similar to the way American Jews feel when they go to Israel. What the Israeli cities, Israel overall is 80% Jewish, but most Israeli cities are essentially 100%. For an American Jew to be suddenly in that environment where everyone around you, everyone on the bus, everyone walking down the street is a fellow Jew, is part of the power and appeal of Israel. It's kind of an emotional Zionism, if you will. And I remember my dearly departed, beloved father, when he used to go to Israel. He was kind of an uptight guy, usually in New York City. When we go to Israel, his blood pressure would go down. It was palpable. You saw him relax. You saw him turn into a different person. And I think many of us may have had the same experience. I want to suggest that if you grew up in Chelsea, you grew up with that feeling. That sense of not just safety, but self-confidence, empowerment. Being Jewish is normal. Being Jewish is, I don't have to think about it. That's the air I breathe, the water I'm swimming in. the environment is Jewish, and that produces a very different kind of Jewishness, a different identity. So if you came from Chelsea, part of your legacy, part of what you inherited, was that feeling that Jewishness is good. To be Jewish is fantastic. It also helps explain a bit why we're also at a sort of moment with a rise in anti-Semitism. It's relatively discombobulating to all of us to suddenly be reminded that a lot of people don't like us. But what counters that is that sense of self-confidence as a Jew, and Chelsea gave us that. That's one area which I think is fairly called Chelsea, Little Jerusalem. Number two, and here is where I'm looking forward, we were chatting among us, the Friedmans and I, and a number of other people were chatting about the extraordinary economic history of the Jews of Chelsea. When the Jews first started arriving in the 19th century, it is a growing industrial town. It has a waterfront, seaport. It has trains running through it, so it's a transportation hub. And it begins attracting industry, in particular paint, oil, and varnish companies, shoe industry, which is important in New England, as many of you know, will plant itself in Chelsea as well. And Jews and other immigrants will be attracted to be part of that developing economy. What happens later on is two things. One, as I alluded to earlier, the rebuilding of Chelsea after 1908, especially the downtown business district, will be largely the doing of Jewish entrepreneurs and storekeepers, business people who start new businesses, who build new buildings to house them, etc. When this building is built in 1909, there is a tremendous amount of building going on all over the city. Much of that renewed activity, much of that reconstruction of this town of Chelsea was its Jewish population, which helps explain why it becomes so dominantly Jewish over the course of the next few decades. And third, there is one particular, this is why I was chatting with the Friedman brothers, one particular area of the economy that Jews specialize in all over the country. Chelsea is one of its major hubs. And I don't think there's enough credit given to the importance, historically, of the junk business. The scrap metal business, right, the next to industry, so all the stuff that gets cast off, all the detritus thrown in garbage heaps, someone is going to come along and make some money from that. And that's the essence of the rag business with recycled clothing, the recycled paper business, and the metal scrap business, all related businesses. Chelsea is a major hub of that, entirely in the hands of Jewish businessmen and, again, entrepreneurs, and that should be seen as part of our history, of our legacy. And I would point out two things, is that, one, it can be related to the old question of why did Jews get so involved in show business, in Hollywood? And the answer you'll most often hear, which has some truth to it, is that it was a new and growing industry that the elite, the established classes, had no interest in. It was beneath them. So who goes into those? Well, immigrants. Well, which immigrants are most entrepreneurial? Business-minded? The Jewish immigrants. That's why Jews found it on. Again, it's a little oversimplified, but it has a basic truth to it. The same can be said of the scrap business. And secondly, as the Friedmans mentioned to you earlier, it also should be thought of an early form of recycling. They didn't know it then, but they were helping the environment, right? They were recycling goods rather than just filling up garbage dumps. And that, of course, much later has become a cause célèbre of many Americans, especially who are concerned about the environment. So the legacy of the scrap business is one of these issues that has yet to find its historian, has yet to be fully researched and written up, but it's an extraordinary story. And gentlemen, I thank Bert and Josh, I thank you in particular. We'll be talking about. So, number one was the population issue. Number two is the economy. Number three, third and final area in which Chelsea truly was a Jerusalem was its religious ambiance, the Jewish life that emerges here. Not just Jewish religion, although that's always central, but Jewish culture, Jewish politics, Jewish sensibility, all emerge in Chelsea in a way that requires a concentration of Jews. One area is simply the Jewish institutions. Obviously, my initial interest, and since we're in a synagogue, synagogues are an important part of that. But as you're all aware, Chelsea had a major Jewish school, the Chelsea Hebrew School, and a major recreation center, the YMHA, and many other clubs and societies and organizations which make up that panoply of Jewish institutional life, which again comes from the Shed. It has good Jewish historical precedent. That is all recreated in Chelsea. What this Walnut Street Shul has done is to collect the evidence, the documentation of that. The names on the memorial plaques, the certificates, and the like. That is all evidence of that extraordinary lively swirl of Jewish activity. One thing they all have, let's add delis and drugstores and local shopping street, all of that, like synagogues and schools, is a way of creating community. They're all centers of community. Think about hanging out at the drugstore. Thinking about using the Walnut Street Shul as a place to meet and to socialize. Community. They're also about religion, but they are most importantly, I would suggest, or as importantly about, there's another joke in that regard. You know, the story about Moshe, who was an anarchist. He hadn't been in the synagogue in 40 years, and he decides he wants to visit his friend, and he goes into the synagogue. He finds his old schoolmate, Herman. He says, "Herman, how are you?" He says, "Moshe, what are you doing here? You're a socialist, you're an anarchist. You don't believe in God." He says, "Herman, I'll explain. You come here to talk to God. I come here to talk to Herman." So the duality of synagogue life is always there. And right now I'm emphasizing the communal part of that. Another really important part of Jewish life in general, especially in the modern world, and especially in a city like Chelsea, is Jewish politics. Now, to some degree, there are Jewish workers, there's some measure of labor union activity in Jewish socialism, but what will become the hallmark of the Chelsea Jewish community is Zionism. As I'm sure many of you are aware, the great leader of American Zionism during the 19-teens was Louis Demetz Brandeis, the great people's lawyer, and later in 1916, he's already the #1 Zionist in America. He's the leader of the movement. He's going to be appointed to the Supreme Court in 1916. But in 1913, 14, 15, he's already on the circuit giving speeches in favor of Zionism around the country. One of the very first speeches he makes is here in Chelsea. He leaves Cambridge, comes over to Chelsea because he knows he will find a receptive audience here. 2 years later, in 1915, he comes once again to Chelsea as the National Convention of the FAZ, the Federation of American Zionists. It was meant to be held in Boston, but he very quickly realizes this is where the energy was. And for a day of that conference, he moves it up to Chelsea, and he says to the assembled, he says, "We have come to Chelsea. We have come because in Chelsea, Jews constitute a larger percentage of the population than in any other city of the United States." And what was Zionism but the desire to create a Jewish state, a Jewish population center, a place where Jewish life and Jewish culture, Jewish bodies, Jewish lives will be safe and secure. That's the essence of Zionism. In a way, Chelsea was the model. It makes perfect sense that Chelsea was a major center of Zionist activity. And third, let's end with talking about religious life. As you know, Chelsea has an extraordinary history of rabbis. Korf established an yeshiva here. There was one of the major figure in the Hasidic world, Rabbi Nachum Twersky, who settled here, the Talmud Rebbe. His great-grandfather was the original Hasidic Rebbe of the Twersky family, who was a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism. If you look in the genes and the genetics of almost every Hasidic leader today, any sect, almost all of them have genes from the Twersky family. It's probably the most important family in that world. One of their leading lights settles in Chelsea. Sadly, he will die early in 1925. But one of his disciples was a man who back in the little shtetl of Shpikov, which was near Talna in Ukraine, today's Ukraine, was the Rebbe's private sofer, his personal Torah scribe. And that gentleman, his name was Asher Sofer, Asher the scribe. He will arrive several years before the Rebbe. He will arrive in the port at Boston and make his way to Chelsea around 1914, 1915, and becomes the local scribe of this community. This is a community that needed someone who could do lettering for religious purposes and ritual purposes. He opened a bookstore, a religious article store, so he becomes some kind of a public figure. Asher Sofer was my great-grandfather. And that's where we come to my own connections. His story, he is an extraordinary story in itself. In his lifetime, he wrote, as you know, to complete the Torah scroll is an arduous process, takes well over a year, over a year for each Torah. He wrote in his lifetime 37 Torah scrolls. And he was somewhat, in those circles, or maybe not in our circles today, but in those circles he was quite renowned for that. He was also seen as a key figure in those Hasidic circles as well. His son, who would come a few years later in 1921, when he arrives as a 14-year-old boy speaking only Yiddish, his name is Itzik. But he will soon be taken to the local public school here in Chelsea, where they will anglicize, Americanize his name, and he becomes Isidore. Isidore sounds American. He will rebel against his father. He doesn't go into the family business. He doesn't want to become a sofer in America. Instead, he goes to art school, goes to the MFA art program to become an artist, where he decides Isidore is too Jewish, and he changes his name yet again to Irving. He didn't want to sound Jewish. Irving Bookstein was my great uncle, my grandmother's brother, the son of this over there, and he lived here in Chelsea for 37 years. For his family, his son is sitting here in the fourth row. Arthur, I hate to single you out, just put it up. This is Arthur, Irving's son. Irving, in, I believe it was, here you'll correct me, I believe it was 1958, moves to Brookline, where he will live out the rest of his life. Continues to raise his family. Arthur today lives in Newton. So from the little shtetl of Shpikov to the American shtetl of Chelsea to the new shtetl of Brookline and eventually to the newest shtetl of Newton is a wonderful encapsulation. Obviously those four are very different, and yet there is a common theme, a common thread between them. And in a nutshell, it encapsulates the American Jewish story. As much as we are eager to become fully American, as much as we go out into America to contribute to it, to become a part of it, to not be overly Jewish, we want to be part of the American world, most of us. There has again and again been this sociological pattern of establishing and re-establishing Jewish cities. Another New Jerusalem, another New Jerusalem. Chelsea is the quintessential example of this. Deserves much greater attention. I hope this building will be its museum. But Chelsea needs to be put on the map in ways that we have just begun to do. I thank you all for your attention, and I would be more than happy to take questions.
So I have a question in Boston. The Jewish wards of Boston, they had a larger population in Chelsea. And were the Jewish wards more heavily Jewish, like maybe 40% Jewish in Chelsea, like approximately
difference being, and I neglected to say this, since the heyday of Chelsea is essentially from one great fire in 1908 to the next terrible fire in 1973, that's how many years? Right? It's over 60 years. That is 2 generations. And most of those neighborhoods that you mentioned were the home of one generation. There was an immigrant community, and their kids all moved to another community and created, but then the grandchildren moved elsewhere. Chelsea, because it lasted longer, because it was better defined and sort of protected geographically and administratively, Chelsea has a longer history, and therefore has a longer time to develop and more to develop.
Like another neighborhood that too, is I think the Jews in Rochester were experienced more anti-Semitism than in a place like Chelsea. Because the Jews were more powerful there, they were all loved there, they were respected, and they were...
Yeah, it's exactly the issue of during the first generation of the immigrants and the second generation. Second generation is the children of immigrants. I'm talking about Roxbury, Rochester. The second generation, the 20s, 30s, 40s, right? In those neighborhoods, there was an Irish neighborhood right next door. And as some of you remember all too well, you had to be careful where you walked. And every once in a while, you would take a beating and chase down the street, right? So that feeling, I don't want to hit it just on Irish people, it's about inter-ethnic hostility, competition, etc. That happens in Chelsea as well. It's not that Chelsea is utopia, but it is mitigated here. It is leavened by the dominance of the Jewish community. And so I would absolutely, I said this earlier, but I'll give you a chance to repeat it. The feeling of safety and security when there is anti-Semitism in the world is all the more important. And we love Chelsea all the more for that warm blanket.
Another nuance that is that there are Jewish cops in Chelsea and Boston that are really not Jewish cops.
That's a good one to add. Yeah, I mean, I usually think of that in terms of Zionism. It's usually attributed to Herzl, but I don't know who said it, that we Jews will have succeeded in creating a Jewish state when there are Jewish police and Jewish criminals. Right? So I guess that would be true of Chelsea. Some questions right over there.
Can you talk a little bit about what the last hour I think many of us have heard on occasion felt? Not the elephant in the room, but the elephant outside the window. What was called then the Mystic River Bridge, its construction, the ramps, the expressway,
It was the year of how much? What year did it?
Chelsea's Jewish neighborhood.
56, give or take, a year or two.
So there's no question that was part of the downturn of Chelsea. There were discussions in this shul and elsewhere. What does this mean for I would love to do the neighborhood here? What does it mean for services in this building, the noise? The Chelsea residents at the time were keenly aware of those issues. But ultimately, I think there's even a larger symbolic issue. The highway is a way out. The highway symbolizes, the opposite of stability in residential continuity. So it's change. And so the writing was on the wall.
And I just want to add, when the bridge came in, if you look at the map downstairs, it took out Poplar Street. And Poplar Street, it took from all the way down Broadway to where the bridge curves. It was all taken out. That was heavily Jewish population as a sidewalk.
So it's the same as the Jews had been moving out a handful of years prior to that. There was
Another turning point is World War II, which signals on the American scene the rise of a new generation. It's the process of suburbanization, not just for Jews, but for all sorts of people. So many, Chelsea, it was around that time in the 50s that they were beginning to look for greener pastures. And everything I've talked about, people were able to articulate that. They didn't understand what they were giving up, right? They were looking to improve their lives and the lives of their children, right? And that's why we moved to suburbia. But in that process, there's not that much self-awareness of what is being given up. I do think there are Jewish policy implications for this. As I've been arguing here, it's really important to live near other Jews. Not all of us do all the time. So, where the community allocates its resources, and builds its buildings, all relate to this basic question of where are the Jews? How do you build a community around that? a lot we can learn from immigrants.
Young lady?
I'm historic.
Thank you so much. So I know my grandfather grew up in, like I think he called it an orphanage, but in Chelsea. I'm so interested in like the different social services that were here to support the Jewish community. I think, and then he called it like a troubled boys home. So I don't know exactly what it was, but I'd love to know kind of how the community supported particularly
So I'm going to take a step to the side from what you're saying. I hope it answers the question. The Jewish immigrant community in that era was one where you have such a vast number of people pouring in such a short period of time. Jews have a little bit of a leg up over other immigrant communities in that there is already an established Jewish community. Right? It's somewhat of a myth, there's some truth to it, that at first the so-called uptowns, the Americanized Jews who were already here, at first they held their noses and they kept their distance from the immigrants. But that very quickly changes. And what then happens is an interesting kind of competition. The uptown Jews begin creating all kinds of aid organizations, aiding immigration, aiding settlement, aiding employment, right, et cetera, right? Those are created by, and that's how the Federation comes into being. But immigrants oftentimes, and this is general, but I do believe it applies, immigrants often presented that as paternalistic. And so they said, I don't need your help, I'm going to build it myself. And so you have an extraordinary amount of energy expended in the immigrant period on creating orphanages and other such self-help aid organizations that were done by immigrants for immigrants. So it'd be interesting to know the history of that particular orphanage. Who was its sponsor? Who was it founded? To whom did it belong? What element of the community was it? And if it was something that was self-generated, or more important emotionally to the immigrant community, this is ours, my baby. So again, I don't know specifics about the orphanage, but those are the kinds of questions that I have. Yes, Joe. There's a clear answer. It's economics. It's where can I find a job? And the multiplying factors in Chelsea and in this area migrate who are willing to do those kinds of jobs. They're hard, half-breaking labor. Only immigrants work. For example, why did so many Jews go into the garment industry? Because we love it.
Some people have a difficulty, and I don't know if it's a light bulb.
Good question, very good question. Very good question. Why did you first come to Chelsea? We stated that it's economic opportunity. You're an immigrant. You are eager to find work, and you're more willing to take any kind of work that's offered. And as an example, I went to the famous Association of Jews with the garment industry. The garment industry was something, again, dominated by Jews, both owners and workers. Why did Jews so love with clothing? Why did we flock into that area? And the answer was, at first, no one else wanted to do it. So it becomes Italian and Jewish sweatshop workers who flood that market, and the same is true here in Chelsea, where the shoe manufacturing industry had begun in Lynn, nearby Lynn, and then later we'll go further north into the Merrimack Valley. But from Lynn, it also comes into Chelsea. And in this industrial area behind us, there will be a number of new factories which need workers. So the word gets out, the immigrants find their way, and that's the beginning. That's the beginning of the story. It will then go in all kinds of directions from there, but I think that's the answer.
Another question over there?
Right. I grew up in one of the other little Jerusalems in Amsterdam. And one of the things that I've noticed is that
So certainly we should always be alert. There's a wonderful colleague of mine in Los Angeles named Sarah Benor, who's the leading sociolinguist of Jewish languages and the way in which those borrowings take place. And those borrowings, as you're suggesting, are great evidence of cultural influence. I mean, if you find Yiddish, you know there were Jews there. Right? In terms of Chelsea specifically, I couldn't tell you, but I would want to know, I would want to go to the local bodegas in town and see, for example, if I order a bagel and I ask for a schmear, does the Hispanic guy know what we're talking about? So we'll have to do everything. We'll go after. But you see the point, and I think absolutely we would find those sorts of things. If we were looking, once again, no one's done this work. So.
Very good. Okay. Listen, thank you everybody. I know the sound quality wasn't as good as you would like it, but we're being filmed by the Chelsea Community Cable TV, and hopefully we'll have a link to that, and everybody will be able to see it and take it from there. One other thing I want to mention is that there is some more food, finger food downstairs, some carrots and hummus and baba ganoush and what have you. So please enjoy it, and thank you for coming